How are you? Marvelous, yeah. Good. I love it. Marvelous is awesome. I had to think about it for a second. People ask me that a lot, and I've said, I'm tired, which I know is an often used answer for many of us. This week has been really great. I got to spend the past 4-ish days teaching and co-directing what we call licensing school. Now, if you're not sure what that is, in the United Methodist Church, when somebody says, I want to be a United Methodist pastor, we interview them, and then we have about a month to teach them everything they need to know to be a United Methodist pastor. So when they start on July 1st, they know it all. And I'm kind of halfway joking. That is our goal, to at least help them feel like they have the tools to lead well. And then we have a kind of a training program that happens over the next 5 years that they continue to take classes and learn and grow. But I got to spend the past week with my co-director and I. We have 6 other teachers. So Pastor Gina was also one of the teachers this year. And we were teaching a group of all the new United Methodist pastors in Missouri about what it means. It was so cool and so life-giving. I hope you'll pray for them, for the churches that they're going to be sent to. It's just a remarkable group of people. So my spirit is really encouraged. My body, it's a long day, so I'm a little tired. And if any of you would ever want to talk about, like, what does it mean to be a United Methodist pastor? What would it look like for God to work, maybe not being a pastor, but even on church staff or our leadership role here at the church? I would love to grab coffee and talk with you and help explore that conversation. And I should add that pastoring isn't always like the person preaching, because some people think, I can't preach, I can't be a pastor. That's not necessarily true. There's a lot of ways that you can use your gifts, and we want to try to do that for all of us. So please email me. I'd love to find a time to connect. I was thinking about preparing the sermon in the middle of this long week, how it feels when you're empty, when you're overwhelmed, when you feel like stressed, exhausted, confused, all the different feelings that we go through. And what does it mean to have God's presence working in our lives during those times? And it reminded me of Jesus' very first sermon. So he's starting out. This is recorded in Matthew's Gospel, Matthew chapter 5. He's walking on the hills of Galilee. It's in the middle of the day. There's a lot of people who aren't working, who are there listening. And Jesus said, happy are people who are hopeless. What? Happy are people who are hopeless? Does that even make sense? Because the kingdom of heaven is theirs. He goes on, happy are those who grieve. Some of you grieve a variety of different things. We just talked about it a couple weeks ago. Are you happy when you grieve? Happy are those who are humble. Now that one you're like, okay, maybe that one, because humility is a virtue in our culture. But in the ancient world, it wasn't a virtue. It was a term of derogatory term. It was almost like happy are losers might be happy are losers. Really? Happy are people who are hungry and thirsty for righteousness, mean they don't have the righteousness they wanted. Happy are the merciful. Happy, okay, that one we kind of get. Happy are the pure in heart. Happy are the peacemakers. Happy are those who are harassed. When you're harassed, are you happy? And in some sense, it doesn't make sense until you realize it's not their circumstances that are making them happy, or some translations say blessed. It's not their situations or circumstances that make them happy or blessed. It's God's work or God's presence in the middle of our difficult times that make us happy and blessed. Does that make sense? It's not that things are going great for them, but that God's working to bring something good, even in the broken, hurt, and pain in our world. Now, I find that fascinating because that really talks to the heart of what we've been talking about. Last week, we began a new sermon series called Life is Messy, and we're looking at the Old Testament story of Joseph. You can read this story for yourself. We're going to gloss over it over the next last week, this week, and the next 2 weeks. You can read it for yourself. It begins in Genesis 37, and it's one of the longest stories about one single person in the scripture. It's kind of written as almost like a soap opera or reality TV show. And you can go back, or you can go back and listen to kind of my commentary about it as well on our website, on YouTube, a lot of different ways. But if you missed out last week, we just real quick recap. Joseph is the 11th of 12 kids, big family. And he was born to Joseph, or Jacob is his dad, and Jacob has 4 wives at the same time. Kids from 4 wives at the same time. That's just messed up, right? Life is messy. So if you ever think like my story's too messy, my background's too messy, my life is too messy for God, for church, don't worry. There's a lot more dysfunctional people in here than anything you can go through, okay? So it's messed up. The point is, don't have 4 wives at the same time, okay? Or husbands. Here, or partners, any of the things. Second is Jacob, his dad, loved Joseph more than any of his other 12 kids because he was the firstborn of his favorite wife. If you have 4 wives or 4 husbands, don't have a favorite. Okay? And if you have more than 1 kid, don't have a favorite. 1 kid, you can have a favorite. 2 kids, you can kind of have a favorite. No, I'm just joking. No, like, don't have a favorite. So are you with me so far? Here's the next thing. If you have a favorite, which you shouldn't, don't tell other people who the favorite is. Jacob told everybody that Joseph's his favorite. He gave him this special robe of many colors. Joseph in the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat that's loosely based off of this story. So if you get it, don't do that. Here's a 4th thing wrong with this story. Joseph, if you are your kid's favorite, your parents' favorite, and everybody knows, don't act like it. That's just being a jerk, okay? Joseph is kind of being a jerk. And so he's acting better than all of his other brothers, and I have a younger brother, and on occasion, I won't admit this online, but hypothetically speaking, maybe, allegedly, I might have beat up my brother on occasion, allegedly. His brothers beat him up and threw him down in a well, then decided to pull him up in a well and sold him into slavery. You might have done a lot of mean things to your siblings. I hope you've never sold them into slavery. So that's all last week. Messed up, right? So at 17 years old, Joseph is being taken away from his home, from his family, from everything he knew. He probably would never get to see them again, he expected. And while every other 17-year-old's dreaming about their future, what they're going to do, who they're going to marry, Joseph is a slave. That's where we pick up our story today. Genesis 39. When Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, Potiphar, Pharaoh's chief officer. Pharaoh was king of Egypt. Pharaoh was not only king, but considered a god. In the ancient world, especially in the Egyptian ancient world, Pharaoh was the ultimate of ultimates, the most powerful, dominant voice of anyone. And so Potiphar was second in command, the second to the most important person in the ancient world. The commander of the Roman guard, an Egyptian, purchased Joseph from the Ishmaelites who had brought him down there. The Lord was with Joseph. Remember Matthew 5? Blessed are, the Lord is with you even in the middle of the most deepest, darkest, hurtful times in your life. The Lord was with Joseph, and Joseph became a successful man. We're going to talk about that here in a little bit, but successful man and served the Egyptian master's household. His master saw that the Lord was with him, and the Lord made everything Joseph did successful. Now, Potiphar thought highly of Joseph, obviously, and Joseph became his assistant. And I don't know how long this took. I imagine it's been years of being slaves, but over time he got more and more influence and power. He appointed Joseph head of the household and put everything he had under Joseph's supervision. From the time he appointed Joseph head of the household and everything he had, the Lord blessed the Egyptian household because of Joseph. The Lord blessed everything he had, both in the household and the field, so that he handed over everything he had to Joseph and didn't pay any attention except for the food he ate. It's kind of funny, right? Like, I don't care about anything. Just make sure you get the food right. And then Joseph was well built and handsome. We'll come back to that in a second. That's weird. I want to point this out first. Things like, you might read Joseph's story and think, things are like pretty good. Like, hey, it's not that bad. Just remember the context. Joseph is what? A slave. Like, he might be the best off of all the slaves, but he's a slave. He doesn't have freedom. He doesn't have agency. He doesn't have choice. He is owned by somebody else. We can't romanticize slavery. It was awful. It was horrible. And maybe he had it better than all the other slaves, but it was truly awful. And I want to point out that God blesses him because of his faithfulness. And we're going to see this over the story today and over the next several weeks. But blessing doesn't mean everything's going to be all right. And I think it's easy to get that confused. Sometimes churches get that confused, that if you're faithful to God, that means everything's going to be okay. No, he's a slave. But regardless of his circumstances, regardless of his situation, he is going to be faithful to God. And because of his faithfulness to God, things are going to get a little bit better than they would otherwise. Now, one more thing to point out. Now, Joseph was a hottie, right? Like, hey, how you doing? Which is a weird thing to include in the Bible, right? Like, let's not talk about body image in the Bible, Pastor Mike. All right. So he's a hottie. Sometimes later, his master's wife, Potiphar's wife, was attracted to Joseph. How you doing? And she said, hey, big boy, sleep with me. And Joseph refused. And said to the master's wife, with me here, my master doesn't pay attention to anything in his household. He put everything he has under my supervision. No one, except for Potiphar, is greater than I am in this household. And he hasn't denied me anything except you. Since you, just so you know, if you forgot, you're his wife. How could I do this terrible thing and sin against God? But every single day, she tried to convince him. But he wouldn't agree to sleep with her or even to be with her. Do you understand why I called Joseph a model of faithfulness, a person of integrity, somebody that we can look towards? What would you do if you were Joseph in this situation? And I know what you're saying, like we're in the middle of church and you think church thoughts and everything else. It's easy to say, oh, I would be firm like Joseph. Would you? Would I? I don't know. I doubt I would be, because there's so much pressure. There's so much external pressure to just do the easy, just do the convenient, just go with the flow. He's a slave. What do slaves do? They do what their master says. They do what the head of the household, what the master's wife would have said. That would have been expected. That would have been the norm. How is it that Joseph remained faithful? Let me ask you a different question. For each one of us, we have our own different temptations. So just quietly, don't shout it out loud. Think about, what is the things that tempt you the most? What are the things that you struggle with the most? The things that you don't want to do, but you do. You know you shouldn't do, but you do. What are those things for you? And then think, every single day, if that thing calls out to you, Michael, come here. Every day get pursued and chased after and tempted. What do? Do you think you can be faithful, or have you been faithful when temptation keeps on knocking at your door? How do you manage persistent daily temptations? Now, I want to point out, I'm presuming something. I'm presuming that Joseph was attracted to Potiphar's wife. We know he's a hottie. We don't know about her. Maybe he wasn't tempted. Maybe that'd make it a little bit easier. But even then, there would have been external pressure for him to just go with the flow, just have the affair, just hook up. So how is it that he resisted temptation to do what's wrong, even when it's convenient? How can we resist temptation to do what's wrong, even when it's convenient and sometimes expected? A couple things. First is this, and this is going to seem so obvious. You're going to be like, duh. If it was easy, we would do it, right? And we don't do it, or at least I should say I don't do it, so that's why I remind us of it. He focused on God. He stayed focusing on God. The reason he was successful in Potiphar's house, why? Do you remember it? It said, the Lord was with Joseph, and the Lord made everything he did successful. He wasn't successful because he was a hottie. He wasn't successful because he was talented. He wasn't successful because of him. It was because of God, and he knew it. And don't mishear me. That doesn't mean if you're faithful to God, God's going to bless you, but it means when we're unfaithful, we complicate our problems. Does that make sense? He's a slave not by his own choice, but by the choice of his brothers. But he didn't add to his problems by sleeping with Potiphar's wife. And so Joseph knew the reason he was successful was because of God. In fact, he said this. Whenever the master's wife became attracted, Joseph had said, sleep with me. In verse 7, it says, Joseph refused and said, how could I do this against, do you remember how could I do this against God? He didn't say, how could I do this against Potiphar? He didn't say, how could I do this against you, Potiphar's wife? He said, how could I do this against God? He kept on focusing on God. Think about this practically. Here's my question. Earlier, whenever I said, what would you do if you're in Potiphar's situation or Joseph's situation? It's easy in church to say we would do the right thing. Why? Because when we're focusing on God, it's easier to resist temptation. Rarely, maybe occasionally, but rarely do I choose temptation in the middle of worship, right? Rarely do I choose temptation when I'm spending time in prayer with God. Rarely do I choose temptation whenever I'm reading the scriptures. Rarely do I choose temptation whenever I'm serving the poor people or marginalized people or trying to stand up for justice. I'm not doing it then, right? Because I'm focusing on God. I suspect if we really think about the times when we give into temptation are the times when we are distant from God or absent from God or stop focusing on God. Part of the reason being disciplined in the spiritual practices is it helps us lead me not into temptation, but deliver me from the evil one. So number one, Joseph relentlessly, consistently kept his focus on who God is and who God called him to be, right? Here's the second thing. This, once again, is so obvious, but if it was easy, we would do it. He focused on what he had rather than what he didn't have. The very first temptation story is in the Genesis, the first book of the Bible. Well, this is Genesis. Earlier in Genesis, I should say, Genesis 3, God created everything in the garden, created the first people and said, hey, everything in the entire world is yours to enjoy. Just, there's one thing, one small thing, don't eat of the fruit at the tree of the center of the garden, right? And then the serpent says, look at the fruit. It's young and well built, right? Don't you just want to take a bite of that apple? Doesn't it look good? I mean, come on. Potiphar's never going to find out, right? In fact, the story of temptation of Joseph draws direct parallels to the garden. And what I find fascinating, it was a temptation for Joseph, But it was also a temptation for Potiphar's wife, right? She was the one who wanted. She had everything, anything in the kingdom she possibly wanted except for one thing. What was it? That nice piece of fruit. And she wanted that. And she wanted the one thing. How many times do we want the one thing that isn't ours? Rather than focusing on everything that was theirs. Joseph said this in verse 8 and 9. My master put everything he had under my supervision. No one is greater to me than I am in this household. And I don't think he was simply saying it to remind himself. I think he was also saying it to remind Potiphar's wife of her faithfulness. Like, hey, we have it good. Let's not make this more complicated, not make this messed up. He might be a slave, but he was probably the best he could have ever hoped for or imagined. But imagine if Joseph focused on what wasn't his, specifically Potiphar's wife. It would have been convenient, it would have been unfaithful, and it would have led to disaster. It's a struggle that all of us have between the now and the later. We get this, right? The now is instant gratification. That's the fancy word for it. Later is delayed gratification. And we struggle with that, right? Temptation is taking the convenient, the easy, the urgent, when we forget about what we have. Maybe it's the cute person that's isn't your partner, rather than focusing on the partner you have. Maybe it's the car. Rather than think about the car you have, you're always looking at the car that's parked in the neighbor's driveway. Maybe it's the Instagram and scrolling through and seeing that person with the perfect family, the perfect vacation, the perfect restaurant, the perfect life, and thinking, if only I had that. Maybe it's our own struggle whenever we look in the mirror and thinking about our body image and thinking, oh, if only. After all, it's Memorial Day weekend, swimsuit season. We all wrestle with that, right? Are you tempted by here's my question. Are you tempted by what you have? Think about what tempts you most. Are you tempted by what you have or what you don't? And what would it look like if we focused more on seeing the joy in what we have, everything God's given us? God blessed Joseph, and what makes Joseph remarkable to me is he recognized that God was the source of everything he has and everything he did, rather than flirting with temptation. Because we live in a world that loves to flirt with temptation, right? You know how I know this? Somebody after church last night said, hey, Pastor Mike, why didn't you talk about all the trashy reality TVs that are all about TV shows, they're all about temptation, right? Why would we do that? Because we want the lure of the other rather than watering our own grass. Now, we're going to go on to two more things. I do want to point out that what happens next for Potiphar, and you can read this for yourself, is he resists temptation. Even then, Potiphar's wife makes an accusation. She physically tries to attack him. He resists. She blamed it on him. Joseph ends up going to prison. Even in the middle of being a slave in prison, God blessed him because of his faithfulness. That doesn't mean it fixed everything. What it does mean is God's going to be with us, even in the hurtful, harmful, hateful things that we find ourselves in, and that God's working to bring good. But one more thing, regardless of his circumstances, that I find so interesting about Joseph, is that Joseph focused on the future more than his immediate circumstances. It was expected that Joseph would sleep with her. He knew, though, there was going to be consequences for those choices. That immediate delayed gratification thing. I remember as a kid, I don't know if this is true for you, did you get allowance? When there's allowance, there's two different types of people. There's some of you that saved it all and never spent anything. And then there's those of us normal people who got our allowance, went to 7-Eleven, got the slushie and the candy, and had an awful next day because of like all that sugar, right? We did. And I remember like I was the one right up to the quick stop shop, get the candy, eat it. And then about like 3 days later, I would hear these magical bells. You know what the magical bells are, right? Ice cream truck. We still have those in St. Charles, right? Like still to this day, I hear those and my heart leaps. Right? And if you spent all your allowance on that, you run out to go get ice cream and you see all your friends and you see your brother or sister there and they're all getting ice cream and, Mom, can I have some money? What did you do with your allowance? I don't know. We know. But we want the now. We forget about the later, right? We see things and we want to buy it now. That's the purpose of credit cards. We see our friends going on this vacation. I want to go on that vacation. So we finance it and then we pay for it over the next 48 months. And a year and a half later, we're like, I want to go on vacation. I don't have any money. I'm still paying off the last vacation. Why? Delayed versus instant gratification. Joseph could have had that fare. She could have hooked up. He could have taken the easy way out, but he knew and he focused on the long-term consequences for the actions. And so often we choose a moment on the lips and we forget. Remember the last line, lifetime on the hips, good friends call back. We forget about the long-term consequences of the choices we make. I want to close with one more story. Every week I say this is a story of the Old Testament story of Joseph, which implies there's a New Testament story of Joseph, right? Who was that? Jesus' dad, right? And I say dad because we learn at the beginning of Jesus' life that Mary had an immaculate conception, that she gave birth to Jesus and that it was a miracle, but Joseph and God was the father, and so Joseph was Jesus' dad, but not father. And some of you know what that's like to have a different father and dad. And so if that's your story, just know you're in good company. That's Jesus' story too. And Joseph, the other Joseph story is way more messed up, so you're good. I simply say that because Joseph became one of the most influential people to Jesus. Throughout Jesus' life, Joseph was the one that raised him, that instilled values and morals and shaped his upbringing and shaped him into who he is and was. Think about what that legacy that Joseph had on us through Jesus. And here's what's remarkable to me. We don't have a single word that Joseph said. We don't have a word. And I'm reminded of that because sometimes we think that following Jesus, being a God follower, is about these big, bold, extraordinary decisions. You know, Joseph had some remarkable moments, like this story where he stands up against temptation as a model of faithfulness. But sometimes faithfulness is the ordinary, everyday choices that we make. It isn't what happens most significantly isn't what happens up here on stage. It's what you do when nobody's looking. It's the choices we make to say yes to God and no to not God, no to sin, no to selfishness, no to indulgence, and to say, God, I'm going to trust you more than the world around me. And we know both Josephs because of their remarkable faithfulness in big and small ways. So going back to that question I asked earlier, what temptations do you wrestle with most? Don't answer. And what could you do that would help you be the type of person that at the end of our lives will stand before God and say, well done, good and faithful servant? And I think for me, in the story of Joseph, it begins with staying in love with God, focusing on God, intentionally devoting myself to the things of God, to think of what I have rather than what I'm missing, to look at what's around me rather than the apple that's over there. And then to trust that God will do something good in the long term, even though it may be inconvenient in the short term. That God is working. No matter what our circumstances are, that God is working to bring good healing and hope, regardless of where we are. Let me pray for us. God, thank you. Thank you that you're always with us, and that we are blessed not by our circumstances, but by your presence and your work and the ways that you're working in our life and in our world. And sometimes we get discouraged or overwhelmed. We fail, and you know every single day, most of us in this room and worshiping online fail. Help us to receive your grace, your power, your spirit, to resist temptation, to resist evil and injustice, oppression, to resist the forbidden, and to trust you, to see you at work in us and through us, and to celebrate all the abundance that you give us, not because we're good, but because you are good and beautiful and holy. And we thank you for Joseph, Old Testament and New Testament, their story and their legacy. Help us live into it. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.